here today to join us for our wonderful briefing on permitting reform, one of the most pressing challenges facing energy development, infrastructure expansion, and resource management across the country, particularly in the West as well. We have an excellent panel lined up this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, and I will hand it over to Zach Kensinger, our policy advisor on Senate Bill 16, to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Michaela. So today we are discussing the need for permitting reforms that directly advance Western priorities. To unleash American energy dominance and streamline the federal permitting process that has long hindered infrastructure development across the country. Our panelists today are at the forefront of translating meaningful permitting process reforms into tangible policy outcomes, and here is a brief introduction of them. Parker Kasmer leads AXPC's congressional, political, and external stakeholder engagement. He was most recently Senior Vice President of External Affairs at Juul Labs, where he oversaw U.S. government affairs and related external programs. Before that, Parker was at Sidley Austin's D.C. office, advising Fortune 500 companies and trade associations on government strategies and engagements. Parker has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and History from the University of Alabama and a Juris Doctor from Washington and Lee University School of Law. Next, we'll go to Matthew Keenan. He is a Federal Affairs Liaison with Americans for Prosperity. He was a staffer to Representative Raul Labrador and Representative Russ Fulcher of Idaho. He spent 6 years in Congress and several years in the State Policy Network, World in Idaho. Between state legislative policy and federal policy, he is a resident of Idaho and aids member offices on behalf of Americans for Prosperity on issues in transportation, energy, natural resources, and onshore federal land management policies. Next, last but not least, we have Justin Prosser. He serves as the Vice President of Government and Political Affairs at the National Mining Association, focusing primarily on hard rock mining and public lands issues. Prior to joining the National Mining Association, Justin worked as a congressional staffer in both the U.S. Senate with Senator John Ensign and the U.S. House with Representatives Kathy McMorris Rogers and Doc Hastings. So obviously a very, very impressive background, so glad they're here with us today. Now we're going to transition to the panel discussion with our experts. This opening question is for all three panelists, and feel free to go wide-ranging on it. It's kind of your opening place. From your sector's perspective, what are the most significant drivers of permitting delays today? And what things have you and your organizations been working on to bring about solutions? Let's start with Parker.
Absolutely, Zach. And first, appreciate y'all pulling this together. You, Michaela, Daryl, Team Lummis, Western Caucus. Timing is relevant, right? Because we are in the heart of trying to get this deal done, permit reform. Hopefully this is a catalyst to both education and maybe drive some momentum. I think there's a real opportunity to get the deal, get the durability of permit reform for all energy projects, oil and gas included, but beyond, to start building again, start developing. So your question, Zach, the most significant driver of delays or issues is that uncertainty. From the administration to administration, what happens with energy projects, infrastructure development. I think when you talk to some like the renewable guys, they're feeling exactly what we felt a few years ago, right, under the Biden administration. And so how do we enact statutory reform that takes out that uncertainty? Uncertainty manifests in a number of different ways, litigation driven, either because there's actual litigation or the threat of it. And so seeing concrete, durable judicial reforms, particularly when it comes to NEPA. AXPC, hopefully a familiar face to a lot of y'all. We represent the largest oil and gas company or producers in the country. A lot of our operators out west on federal lands. And so seeing those historic delays through the BLM permitting process, got to address those issues. Having permit predictability when we're trying to operate on federal lands, whether that's a permit by rule approach to kind of grease the skids a little bit in terms of those reviews, or even taking away federal permitting requirements when like the federal government does not have an interest. I'll call out the Hoeven bill on fee fed, super technical, but what it says is if you're not operating on land where there's no federal ownership on the surface or a mineral ownership on the minerals, you don't need an APD, you don't need a federal permitting requirement. So those are specifics to oil and gas. But at the end of the day, we got to get out the uncertainty. And I think that's the real opportunity with what we're trying to do, particularly on the Senate side, of get the deal done.
Awesome, thank you so much. And now let's go to Matt.
Thank you for putting this together. Real honor to address all you today. And thank you also to Senate Western Caucus and Western Caucus Foundation. If you're not familiar with Americans for Prosperity, we're primarily a grassroots organization. We have 37 state chapters. That's a physical presence in the state. We don't just roll in and roll out. From a grassroots perspective, we've been working closely with House and Senate members. We did a road to prosperity where we went to mineral sites, coal sites, we visited LNG sites to really highlight with the members or state officials the need for permitting reform. And in large part, we're at a precipice where the United States, we've kind of flatlined on our energy production. I will say the oil and gas sector, that's a little bit different story over the last 10 years. Electricity-wise, we're at about 14.5% of world production. China's at 33%. And in large part, your national interest, your economic interests all lie in what that production capacity is. And echoing what Parker's saying, we saw over 300 organizations get behind Mr. Westerman's SPEED Act. I don't know in the time that I've been in this, maybe just, we've never seen this much industry, stakeholder support come to say we need this change. And we're at a point with artificial intelligence, general intelligence, all of these different potentials where we want the United States leading on that issue. The next tech revolution, we want it in the United States with rule of law, with our predictability, with our ability to have good put into that. Permanent certainty is also another factor that we've been speaking with offices on. It's a back and forth. We really need to see the knives put down in the negotiations and start a real conversation about where we can come together on transmission, where we can come together on pipelines, et cetera. The House has largely done a lot of this work, and we're hoping the Senate can take that input and come together for a package that is bipartisan in nature.
Thank you very much. Now on to Justin.
One of the true benefits of going last in a great question is you get to hear all the great answers and then just say ditto. One of the things that we like and want to kind of from our lens, permitting reform needs to happen for a variety of reasons, for infrastructure, for manufacturing, things like that. But our main focus is to ensure a robust domestic supply chain of energy and mineral resources flowing to where it needs to go, especially for domestic operations, for manufacturing, technology, for infrastructure, for national defense, and everything in between. And so don't let anybody tell you that we don't have robust energy and mineral abundance beneath our feet, because we do. It's just that policies that we have self-inflicted upon ourselves over the last several decades have limited our ability to actually achieve permitting security, mineral security, ag security, forest, ag and timber security, things like that. We constantly shoot ourselves in the foot. And, I've been in national mining for almost 12 years now, on the Hill for almost a decade before that. When have we not talked about permitting reform? And so I think what I could impart to you guys as we pursue this is don't let this opportunity go by. Many here who've been around for any sort of time have seen time and time again, the ability of, discussions on permanent reform or what have you. Good policy. I'll just start there. Good policy, and all of a sudden somebody gets a wild hair and says, "Oh, we'll get a better chance to sit at this next Congress or next year," or something like that. Seize the moment. What is the did poets say? Seize the day or whatever. Let's actually get something done, because as you talked about the SPEED Act, that built on the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the need for reforms there. Again, it's not about building Rome in a day. It's not about building permanent reform all at once. It's a gradual improving process that we need, and we cannot lose every opportunity we get, because as we fall further and further behind, especially in the energy and mineral resources supply chain, other countries, other geopolitical adversaries are advancing themselves farther and farther ahead. And so if we are ever going to hope to be a global competitor, at least in my space, we need these reforms. We need durable and lasting reforms that transcend politics, transcend administrations, changing administrations. And I would like to say I coined the term first before Chairman Westerman, but project agnostic permitting reforms are what's really necessary, because we've been browbeaten for decades between the Obama and Biden administrations on mining projects. And it's wonderful what the Trump administration is doing. It's truly amazing what happens when somebody in the White House prioritizes your projects. Permitting reform can be done. We watched Secretary Holland every time she got in front of Senate DNR and say how many projects, renewable projects, that they were permitting and driving through the process. Well, it's all about prioritization. Essentially, if you get to a point where you're not prioritizing picking winners and losers, that might be actually beneficial to all of us that care about permitting reform, all of us that care about national security, all of us that care about economic security here in the United States. And so that's what I would leave with you is, do not let this chance go by. And I know we had, the Senate ENR hearing, or sorry, Senate UPW hearing was a very big kumbaya, last week, which was a little bit last week. It was a little surprising how cohesive the message was, and how beneficial the message was as we pursue durable and lasting permitting reforms. And if we just can, as you said, put the knives away, imagine what we could be doing. So.
Awesome. Well, that was a great answer. Completely agree with you. I will tell you, Chairwoman Lummis is in complete agreement. We have to get something done now. So it's kind of a now or another situation. Project certainty is important in addition to having a far-ranging bill that touches upon a lot of different areas of permitting. Justin, you did such a good job right there. We're going to go right back to you.
All right, guys,
So
steal my answers.
This question is about the Clean Water Act. So how do Clean Water Act permitting requirements affect project timelines and investment decisions? And where do you see the greatest opportunities for improving efficiency or clarity?
Well, the administration is doing a lot of great things on that to kind of sift through and pursue some deregulatory activities there. Well, let me just first and foremost say, from the mining industry standpoint, we don't want to cut any corners. We do not want to be deregulated. We do not want to be, we don't want a shortcut, because that weakens the overall project. That weakens our ability our social license to operate in our communities. And so we don't want anything that would be construed as weakening that. But what we do need is certainty. And what we do need is clarity amongst those regs. And so from a Clean Water Act standpoint, one of the things that I think litigation, I think there was litigation mentioned earlier, at every single point in our permit time frame for any given project, our members just expect litigation. And so that's an ever-given constant. And the ability to try and pursue something to limit those frivolous lawsuits, or do, and again, there's a lot of great proposals out there. I'm not going to go through them all, but trying to pursue something that does provide an off-ramp and a little higher bar than every environmental organization that has a state presence or a state footprint. But then let me back up and say, time and time again, we have a project proponent in a state. They're working amazingly with the state and local communities, the stakeholders, and environmental groups, things like that. But all of a sudden, the national group that is associated with the state then sues on their behalf. And so then it's all that great work that was done is just eroded, or it doesn't count for anything. And so I think, again, litigation reform is probably one of the biggest things that we can tackle.
Thank you very much.
But again, that's just not just clean water, that's clean air, that's NEPA.
Thank you. Okay, well, next we're going to move to Parker. So at a high level, how do Clean Air Act permitting requirements affect the development or expansion of energy and industrial projects? And where are the biggest opportunities for streamlining or clarification?
Yeah, so from the oil and gas perspective, there are targeted reforms within Clean Air Act that would help move the needle, particularly when you think about various attainment requirements in some states, particularly in, say, blue states, Colorado, New Mexico. And so I think there could be a more federalist approach on Clean Air Act to like balance out, right, where you have those particular states having more stringent but unnecessary requirements that are impacting what our guys are doing on the ground. Like Clean Air Act's a piece. I think just to go back to Clean Water Act, because all these things have to move together when you look at the reforms. Look at NEPA, look at Clean Water, look at Clean Air Act, federal lands permitting, et cetera. Like it's across the board, whether it's for oil and gas, other energy projects, infrastructure development, et cetera. But just on Clean Water Act, our molecules got to go somewhere, right? And it's pipelines. And so you have to have Clean Water Act reforms to be able to build those pipelines. We can't have Congress approving permit projects like Mountain Valley Pipeline. These things have to work through. You got to have more clarity and certainty in terms of when states are reviewing this. Like New York, an obstacle, right? Like you need the pipelines in New York. You need the pipelines across the mid-Atlantic, down south, and across the country because the molecules got to go somewhere. It's like the big theme that you're going to hear about is grid reliability. Excuse me. We are not set up to meet the looming demand that's going to come on with AI data centers. You've all seen the projections. We got the molecules to support it, particularly on the natural gas side. But unless you're able to build a pipeline and our molecules to go somewhere to that end consumer, it ain't going to happen, and the grid's going to fail. So when you talk about like meeting the moment, this is why you need permit reform probably yesterday, but it's got to get done because we got to build because the grid's at risk, molecules got to go somewhere, and the demand is ever increasing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. Next, we're going to go to Matthew, and I think this is something that we're all thinking about a ton. So NEPA is often described as the backbone of federal permitting. What specific changes to NEPA would most improve certainty and timelines?
Thank you for that. I think we saw a lot of good work in the FRA and the OBB, the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, that provided some guidelines on agency expectations and deadlines. Really, in large part, if the question around 180 days is the timeline for the agency, the start point at which the process begins. I think somewhere in there, 6 months is kind of the out of the language of the SPEED Act. Really, for a project, though, it's also the science that comes around that. If a project is announced and they go to do the comment period, they're going to take in the necessary, best science available. I think you really need to trim up what can be applicable, because in some cases, even if though there is existing review that's been done on a project, if the agency goes to restart the clock or they go to reassess what science or how that review process is going to be looked at, that I think is a vagueness that needs to be clarified. And even though I'll echo some of the comments here. I know that we look at NEPA as the backbone. We were handed, in my opinion, a real gift with the 7-county decision. Here you had a railroad in Utah that was going to have an end product across the country, and the court unanimously said, NEPA is procedural, period. Like, we don't need to discuss this, it's procedural. And so we have a gift to the legislative branch to really come in and clarify where that road is. And NEPA is a very short document. It's not super long. And I think the last thing I would say is, yes, the litigation. There's a new study by the Breakthrough Institute that is listing that 70% of lawsuits in this arena are by NGOs. We're a grassroots organization. We want the local community to have input in the NEPA process. We want stakeholders to have the opportunity to comment as well. What we don't want to see is partisan process that's litigious overtaking the ability for our country to keep the lights on. I don't know if you guys saw the opening in Milan for it was like the curling event, and the lights went out, and everybody's tweeting, oh, Milan's not ready for, and I don't know about Milan's energy system, but we're at that point Parker was making, we need to move those electrons, and if it's just paperwork and agencies trying to get their final, if it's a biological opinion or whatever, they're just trying to litigation proof it. Many of you work, committee level, staff level, you've seen those reports, you've seen a 3,000 page EIS that's just chock full of every single possible scenario. And that's not even talking about the Endangered Species Act. So those are some core fundamental things that, again, are really addressed in the SPEED Act. I will do a little shout out for mining folks. HA Res 140 is on the Senate side. That is a massive project out of Minnesota. I highly encourage you all to take a look at that. It passed the House like 2 weeks ago.
Bipartisan.
Bipartisan, thank you.
Can I also just,
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things that I think, as we're
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. As we're talking about all this, we have to pursue something that is durable. And we should care. As we're pursuing all this, the 7 counties is really important to kind of solidify. But I remember Senator Daines years ago, he was talking about 2 mining projects up in northwestern Montana. He was talking about it being a rinse and repeat process. And so these 2 mines had been in the permitting process for upwards of 32 and 35 years respectively. And he had stacked on the dais every EIS, every EA, and this thing, obviously the dais is right here, the shelf of the dais, and that thing stood another 5 feet on top of the dais. And that was thousands and thousands of pages of environmental analysis that was great, and thorough, but how much of that was repeated? And how much of that, did that environmental review actually improve the outcome of the project? No. But what it does do is it keeps we've all heard of the death of 1,000 cuts. Well, the longer the process, and I'm sure this goes for every project, or most projects, but with a mining project, you have to establish a mine plan of operation. This gives you kind of what you plan to do on a particular mine site. And what that does is gives you kind of the cost and the structure and how you will actually do that project moving forward. Well, the length of that time of the permitting process basically says, okay, if I'm able to meet my permitting timeline of what this plan of operation says, that's great. But as that permitting timeline extends and extends and extends, it completely blows that mine plan of operation out of the water. And so then I have to go back to square one, or that my mining company has to go back to square one and say, okay, this is no longer economical. The workforce has gotten more expensive. The costs have gotten more expensive to build. All these kind of things. And so that's the rinse and repeat process too, not just on the environmental side of things, but the longer the process takes, you can clearly see basically a third to a half of the mine's overall value proposition actually eroded because of that length of the permitting process. And so I'm sure it's for infrastructure and other type projects too, but that's something that we really have to tackle, in this conversation as well.
Awesome. Parker, would you like to take a stab at it too?
NEPA.
NEPA.
Yeah, judicial reform and permitting lawfare. The most important thing that the Senate can do is pass the SPEED Act. Everything that's included in there. Yes, you can streamline reviews. Yes, you can go through programmatic tiered reviews, improve the agency process, but you got to stop the litigation because that's the biggest impact on the ground for our guys downstream, no pun intended. But you got to address the litigation side, either because the threat of or the actual of litigation is what's delaying these projects. I think for us, on average, when there's litigation, it's like 4.5 years. We think about oil and gas development, it's already on like a 10-year cycle. When you look at like the pre-leasing, exploration, development, go through the permitting process, and then you get hung up in not just the review, but ultimately the litigation that delays this.
we would love those timeframes. From
Very true.
From
Yeah.
start to finish, to bring a mine online in the United States takes on average 29 years. So again, that's average. Some of those take a lot longer. So, that's longer than Chuck Schumer's been in the Senate. So I think that, that's lifetimes. So I think we have to be realistic about, when projects advance, when they come online. Because, everybody says, oh, this portion of the process only takes a few years, or, that's fine. But years add up when you are talking about a process that, again, is in that rinse and repeat cycle. So, certainty, as you said earlier, is really, what permitting will provide. Because there's tremendous amounts of money sitting on the sidelines, waiting and watching permitting reform. We're also waiting and watching the efforts to address price manipulation and commodity manipulation in the markets. And so if we can tackle those things, we will see an amazing amount of investment come off the sidelines immediately and invest in the United States.
Well, just to give you all a little bit of perspective on the oil and gas side. So we're the largest producer of oil and gas in the world, right? That's because the shale revolution, going back to 2005. We currently produce about 14 million barrels of oil a day. That's because of new production. When you think about like the life of an oil well, after year 2, there's a 75% production decline, and then it steadies out, right? So the reason that we are the world's largest producer of oil and gas, and we're producing 14 million barrels a day, is because of new production. You can only produce more oil when you're developing new projects. Those new projects require permitting. And so if this thing stalls out, you're going to see a rapid decline in that production curve because you need new wells to maintain that and increase it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for that. And Justin, to your point, there was, I think it was a McKinsey study that came out very recently that said that there's, $2.5 trillion sitting on the table because permitting delays are just, leaving things for unending times. So thank you for that. Next, we're going to go to whoever wants to answer this question. So be excited. So the Endangered Species Act consultations can significantly extend permitting timelines. What targeted reforms or process improvements would reduce delay while maintaining species protections?
I have a place in my heart for ESA. There's a lot of things, again, in this discussion that are going to revolve around NEPA. That's kind of the word that's thrown around. ESA is one of the Endangered Species Act is one of those things that is kind of forgotten about in this discussion. Chair Westerman does have a bill that I believe a hearing has already happened. It's the ESA Amendments Act of 25. In my opinion, I think really targeted permitting reform for the ESA, you have to look at distinct population segments. You got to look at the subspecies. We have Fish and Wildlife and NOAA cataloging distinct population segments that then require the potential for consideration of their historic range and critical habitat, which, in my opinion, critical habitat is the worst designation that you could have for potentially a site that could be a project or some type of energy source. So, in the subspecies, really the target reform is take subspecies that are very close and very similar to the actual species and catalog them as the same. I'm from Idaho. I love grizzly bears. They're great. We have, I think, 3 distinct population segments, and they are managed almost separately. If you talk to Mr. Zinke or Danes, they are trying to get those guys kind of all put back together and off the list. But the danger is that these agencies have created systems like the listing priority system, or LPN. They've created like their own little category of like, oh, well, we can't list this particular species right now, but we're going to put it up on the list a little bit higher, a little bit lower. That's not in statute. So Congress needs to come in and clarify, okay, you're creating new subspecies, but are they biologically 99.9% related to the species itself? And can they be treated and managed as a population, as a species? And so instead of having a conversation, so in Utah, they're trying to build a highway in Municipal Noise District. I think it just got a ROD. They had a desert tortoise conversation for the last 20 years. if the desert tortoise is related to the desert tortoise of Arizona, it's related to the desert tortoise of, I don't know, Idaho, we can have them treated as a managed population without stopping massive projects. So in this conversation, I'm a former House staffer. I love what has come out. We've seen the SPEED Act, we've seen the Permit Act. ENC just marked up back in January some Clean Air Act stuff. So we're addressing all these different things, but if you have an opportunity, please take a look at what Mr. Westerman is doing on the House side. I'm sure EPW, ENR are getting there, or have had conversations, but the ESA really needs, I'll stop.
As somebody that spends a lot of time fly fishing the backcountry of Idaho and Wyoming, I have a different feeling towards grizzlies. But on ESA, to echo your point, you got to redefine critical habitat and tighten that up, given everything that was just said. Also, again, it goes back to litigation. What we see is this concept of sue and settle. You have third parties, NGOs, suing the agency, and having these blanket designations. You got to reform that. ESA, you need targeted reforms. It can be done. It also impacts everything. It's nationwide, right? It's oil and gas projects, it's renewable projects, it's every single infrastructure. Given how expansive it's gotten in terms of the interpretation application, it affects everything. And so to your point, we get excited about NEPA, we get excited about clean water, clean air. ESA is equally important, and I think there you can have some very precise reforms that alleviate the pressure.
I would also say that I think, I recently did a presentation with Gene on my slide deck for the ESA. I showed a Eagles Hotel California. Like, you can check in anytime you want, but you can never be in. Like, that was a little bit tongue in cheek, but especially the delisting aspect too. That if a species has reached, regardless of distinct populations, if a species has reached levels that far exceed the set level thresholds, let's get them off the list. Let's reprioritize some of those limited funds for others that might need help. We also had, speaking of distinct populations, we had the Teams buckwheat nearly derail a mining project in southern Nevada, and I'm trying to remember specifically, but I think of the designated critical habitat that the Fish and Wildlife Service placed, there was an overlap of 10 acres between proposed mine and the habitat of the Teams buckwheat. Again, a distinct population found nowhere else in the world, other than this exact mine site. And as a critical designation, Fish and Wildlife Service put a 900-acre buffer over that. And it's like, okay, I 100% want to protect the species, ensure its survival, maintain it with stakeholder support. But that seems a little on edge as far as the easy ability of this type of thing to derail, or species to derail projects. So again, it just needs to be thoughtfully reviewed.
Absolutely, and you guys have shouted out a lot of great bills. My boss, Senator Lummis, actually has the Endangered Species Recovery Act, getting back to the core mission of what it's for, right? Species shouldn't go on there and be there indefinitely. If they've reached populations where they're no longer endangered, they shouldn't be on there, right? It's not just to be unending for environmentalists. So thank you guys very much for those responses. You all have touched upon this to a certain extent, especially you, Parker. I know you have a law background as well, so have some more. But on judicial review reform, such as statutes of limitations and standing, to achieving real permitting reform, we need changes there, right? And so, what approaches are the most likely to gain traction in the Senate? And before I say that too, I mean, think about if you're in Wyoming and you have a project that you're trying to permit, and then somebody in this group in the state of Oregon files a lawsuit, and then your project is tied up for decades. I mean, how do you have standing in that situation, right? And so what needs to change to get us to a really good place on that?
Kick us off. The most impactful thing you can do is have no private right of action. to sue under NEPA. It is purely procedural. Maybe someday the Supreme Court makes that decision, but it's the district courts over time that have interpreted that yes, you can sue. That's not explicit. And so by removing that is probably the most drastic, significant policy outcome you can have. I don't think there's going to be appetite on a bipartisan basis. Maybe the Supreme Court decides that someday. Short of that, you got to address the litigation funnel, right? So from beginning to end, limiting the standing requirements in terms of who can sue, on what basis can they sue, and then ultimately the remedy. Second to removing predicate right of action, probably the most consequential judicial reform is the remedy, and limiting it to remand to fix the deficiencies. So no more vacatures, no more canceling of projects, but having that explicit remedy, which you see in the SPEED Act, would have a significant effect. Because it all goes back to permitting certainty, particularly taking away the threat of litigation, but cleaning up the litigation funnel of who can sue, how you sue, and what that remedy is, certainly helps to address that.
Not much to add there. I think standing is like we want the actual community that's impacted. As a grassroots organization, we want to see people participating in the public comment process and getting to that yay and yes. But really having groups that can just kind of roll in, provide a suit. I won't talk about EJA, but just there's a lot of incentives, let's just say, for that pipeline that Parker was talking about. And the timelines that are kind of the SPEED Act doesn't necessarily have to be the SPEED Act, but I think they're just having kind of a firm deadline is really the biggest thing for us.
I'm not going to recreate, you guys, I agree with a lot of what you said. One of the things that I think too on judicial reforms that I was so heartened to see over the several permitting hearings, both in the House and the Senate, that we've had this Congress, is how many folks on either side of the political spectrum are significantly impacted by permitting delays that are at least in part or largely caused by judicial, constant and repeat offenders of litigation. And so I think that is a bipartisan consensus that we can start with. To your point, I don't know where that bipartisan legislative remedy comes together, but I think there's a path forward. I just don't know exactly what it is.
Awesome. Well, you guys all did an amazing job. Now we're going to transition into the Q&A portion of this. So as you can tell, these are very smart people, go really in depth here. So please ask tough questions. And do we have a microphone?
Only as smart as the paper in front of me. So we're in right? It's the job to get permit reform done. I actually think we can do it. When I look at years past, we've been doing this seemingly every single Congress. There's an appetite to get something done. Go back to 2024, Manchin-Barrasso bill, great reforms in there, ultimately fell short. I think what you're seeing now is a couple things. One, the momentum across industries, right? So it's not just oil and gas clamoring for permit reform. It's everyone across the energy supply chain, infrastructure supply chain, from the producers, regardless of source, the pipes and wires, and then the end users, whether that's labor, workforce, data centers, AI, et cetera. So you certainly have the support outside. You have the support inside. But ultimately, a deal's got to get done, right? There has to be compromise. And we saw some great reforms come across the House side, but in the Senate is where we make the deal. And I do think there are more, let's call it trade bait, that's on the table this go around, because for years we fought over transmission. I actually think the parties are relatively copacetic on ultimately what transmission could be. That's not going to be the essential key here. It's other things. It's things like permitting certainty to address actions, whether it's this administration, a future administration, on their ability to rescind, revoke permits. I think that is a big piece, and it's going to bring together the compromise. We might have to see a deemed project approval list, like Mountain Valley Pipeline. It's a horrible way to permit projects, but maybe that's how a deal gets done. You throw 10 projects on a list in a statute, approve them. So there's more trade opportunities, I think, to get the compromise done. But the most important thing that this room can do, your members can do, is drive that momentum, because the work's being done on ENR, the work's being done at EPW. Yes, it's stalled out a little bit, but this requires member activation. And so have your members inspired, calling to reform. You continue to see some of these permitting certainty concepts be introduced. Those are all positive signals, but it's going to require member activation. There's sufficient outside support, inside support, but you got to be vocal and active to get this thing done.
Anybody else?
Sorry, I was just going to say, and if there's an opportunity, I would say ditto everything, because there's a tidal wave of support for getting something done. Also, if you see something that we could be doing from an outside organization, let us know if there's levers or triggers that we can engage in to convince your boss. I mean, you're the one that is FaceTiming your boss all the time, or with your boss all the time. And so if there's something that will motivate them to get more on board, God, let us know, because we're ready and willing to do it. Things I don't do for permanent. But trying to pursue this is, again, I don't want to lose this opportunity, because time and time again, when you're in the Congress, like sand through the fingertips, and it's just gone. You got to start all over. As you said, great reforms in Brasso. We really thought that we could have pushed that thing forward. I think one of the barriers, or one of the tripping hazards of that exercise, was the lack of coordination between committees and between the House and the Senate. I think you got the wagon wheel of jurisdiction, and you're talking to this committee, but jurisdictionally, these two committees need to engage. And so I think that was a bit of a tripping hazard. I'm not going to lay all the blame on Senator Carper's staff, but I think that there needs to be more active coordination. And I know that's happening this year with this conference. I know that's happening. That's where I've seen things fail in the past.
Certainly echo, I'll just be real quick. I think really what's going to drive a lot of this narrative is that as the Senate comes to act, we're seeing a very short margin in the House. And we want to ensure that the Senate is moving in that direction. Our country's built on compromise, and I think we can get there. In large part, though, I think the other driver is going to just be, frankly, people's electricity bills. Mm-hmm. Every single member, regardless of where they live, whatever state, whatever district, electricity bills are rising. It has to be addressed. It's an affordability issue at the end of the day. And there's always going to be a distraction somewhere else. There's always going to be some testimony on the Hill, somebody else, some other big thing going on. Permitting is really hard. It's a hard thing to do. And again, those conversations that you can have with members, with staff to keep that alive and going is critical.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your responses. I would expect a very smart question from a Langford staffer, so thank you for that. I think we've got one more question over here, and then we'll wrap up.
Thanks, everyone. And sorry, this might not be a very smart question.
It will be.
I'm talking to the local council. I'm sorry, I raised my hand. We had a chance to answer. We have a lot of members, a lot of organizations that are global in nature. And I guess the simple question I have, probably Justin, I think the best place to address this, is what is there to learn from some of our national, international partners, or countries that they have operations in? Because they're spread thin, and they're going where they can get things done, and they can get permits done. How do we bring that back in? Is there a moment to learn from that? Is there an opportunity to raise awareness around that? Or should we just stay laser focused on saying, put your time and energy here in the U.S. and keep quiet on all of that?
Well, as the National Mining Association, I said keep quiet. No, my directive is to prioritize and seek out opportunities and build pathways for domestic projects. I mean, that's what I do. But I learned very on taking this job that money transcends international boundaries, and when there's the ability to bring a project online in a much quicker and more efficient way, people are going to do that, regardless of mining, manufacturing, you name it, it's going to happen. So I think we need to push the boundaries. We need to remind folks of that. And one of the things that my colleague and I, Martha Newell, were talking about yesterday, we've never, in our lifetimes, in a lot of people's lifetimes who are engaging in these debates have ever experienced scarcity in especially mineral and energy supply chains. We've, none of us, I'm sure, many of us haven't lived through the 70s oil crisis, things like that, where we may not be able to get the metals and minerals that we need and want, and energy that we need and want when we need it. And so the ability that we've never experienced that scarcity. So that's never triggered a response to actually be adults. And I don't mean to you guys, but actually triggered a response from members of Congress to actively engage in putting the knives down, putting everything else aside, and saying, hey, I'm not going to try and score political victories here. I'm not going to try to erode confidence in that political party or that political party. I'm here to seek out policy that is best for the American people and best for future-proofing our nation, for our economic and national security and our economic competitiveness.
Awesome.
So,
Anybody else?
I'll just echo a great question. And, the United States dollar is trading about 55% of transactions for commodities, et cetera. It is inherent that the United States be that leader because we are really, we've had the great peace the last 70, 80 years. And Justin's right. We have, you can on demand, you can get a product through Amazon, you can order something, get a car, we're used to those kind of things. But we've lost sight of how do these things come about? What is my phone made of? It's made of a lithium product, there's copper in it, there's gold in it, there's all these different things that have to come from somewhere. And really from our perspective, we want that as, trade is a good thing. Trade is not a bad thing. The United States has built trade out strongly over that period. As these things become, as scarcity comes about to the United States, it's not the first time we've experienced it. The reality is we have to do the hard things like mining in the earth and extracting resources and converting those resources into something that's useful. And that is regardless of a Democrat or Republican office. And I think as that realization comes about, we can avoid that problem. It's staring us in the face of the scarcity issue. We can avoid that problem through compromise, and permanent certainty is one of those things too.
Awesome. Well, great responses and a great question. They're very smart questions. So thank you to our panelists for your commitment to advancing Western priorities through federal policy implementation. The Western Caucus welcomes ongoing collaboration as we strive to unlock the West's economic opportunities while upholding the principles of self-sufficiency and local control that shape our region. So thank you again, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate that.